We're dipping below E. What's great is Kramer, I think, changed that salesperson forever. He unlocked that salesperson's potential of humanity in that episode. It was beautiful. Like, he became a new person.
Welcome to 33 Tangents, a weekly podcast featuring a rotating panel of co-hosts that all work together in the same company but live in different areas of the world. The discussions cover a wide variety of topics from digital analytics to working remotely to current happenings in business and technology. Our regular day-to-day conversations often go off in various directions, and the goal of this podcast is to share our ideas and find new ways to engage with others. How was your flight home on, what was it, Friday you flew home?
Oh my gosh, that flight was so long. And it wasn't like it was long. It just, I watched the entire movie Gangs of New York.
Oh,
and then the entire movie Zombieland.
Ouch,
and
that is a
then
long flight.
and then finished up 127 hours, which I started on the flight to Boston. and then still had time.
Wow.
I know. That was yeah.
How long of a flight is it normally?
I mean, it's a 5-hour flight.
It's a 5-hour flight, okay.
Yeah, but it's like, usually I fall asleep for a little bit here on flights, and I didn't want to because I wanted to be able to sleep when I got home and like kind of counteract the jet lag for, but it was crazy.
Yeah, I want to say coming home from London back in August, it's like an 8-hour flight, and every pun intended, that it flew by. Yeah. I mean, I was bad jokes today. Bad jokes all around.
Dad jokes, actually. Dad jokes.
But no, if it was such a fast flight and it just took forever to get through customs, I'm like, damn it, it's going to take me longer to get through customs than it did to actually fly home. Like, I think I was in customs for like an hour and a half.
That sucks.
Yeah.
The only time I've gone through customs a couple of times, but I remember flying into Cancun and like just this like 2-hour line of humans like being flowed through in the most like obscene looking area you can imagine in the Cancun International Airport. That was ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think I answered like one of the questions wrong, like through the automated kiosk. So I bought my son like a little thing to bring home for him. And, I get there and they ask the one question, do you have commercial goods? Well, I answer yes, and then realize they're asking like, did I bring promotional stuff to give out? Either like to give out over there or give out coming home or whatever. So of course they put me through the really long line instead of the automated line, like, oh yeah, you're good to go, just keep going kind of thing. So that was also part of the problem.
Seems like a broken system.
Yeah, pretty much.
Government, man. This could go down a really
dangerous road. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that it's all recorded. So.
All right. Shall we get on to the topic at hand?
That's probably wise.
So today I wanted to talk about something, Brian, you and I had kind of touched on a couple times based on some stuff we've worked on together. And right now I'm calling this episode Data Hoarders. We've all encountered those clients that are so focused on data collection instrumentation and then the data that they want to collect after that they actually lose sight of using it. I mean, we've all encountered this. So like, how do you approach an engagement like this? How do you get them to refocus and show them that you don't need to track absolutely everything to get valuable insights?
Well, I mean, maybe do we frame up this discussion a little bit more and really define what a data hoarder is versus what they aren't?
Yes.
We could do that. I think it would also be helpful to talk about maybe the reasoning why, right? Because
Yeah.
I think we can definitely focus on, because we've all worked with people that are like that. But I think it would be really, really valuable to even go a step back further to say, well, why are they like that, and address some of those issues. Because I want to say that I've identified some clear trends where people do this, and it's about something different than hoarding the data. There's something deeper there. So I don't care where we start.
Yeah, and the deeper issue, like do we have a TV show over it, and it's on a major network on cable TV, and but no, seriously though, I think you're right, Jason. It does spawn from something deeper um, within their role, but I also think that there are people that are under this type of they're this character, but they don't realize they're a character, and I think it would help for anybody that's listening to know, like, what do we mean by a data hoarder versus just a good analytics implementer. And for me, what I would define this as, and I'd love to hear what you guys define it as well, is someone that is more focused on capturing data than they are at analyzing or using the data. And it's a pretty broad definition and spectrum there. Um, but it's really the point is that they're more concerned about getting data in than they are of getting data out to the consumers and the users of the data.
Yeah.
And they refuse to eliminate data that's no longer being used and has really no life in the future. They want to just continually build, and it maybe they're data hoarding and like the constant builder. They're similar situation. And then one other thing I'll say, and then I'd love to get your guys' feedback on is I did some searching around data hoarding earlier today, and there's actually a subreddit for data hoarders.
You got to stay off Reddit, man.
So
Dude, send me the link.
So it's kind of funny. Like, there's a whole data hoarder subreddit that exists, and I don't know if it's the same thing because we're talking about analytics and web data, but I did think it was funny that there was a whole subreddit for data hoarding.
And just as a side note, Bryant has a serious problem with Reddit, and he goes into these deep holes, and I'll get text messages at all hours of the day with some weird something that he's uncovered on Reddit, and I'm like, dude, you're freaking me out, man.
Yeah.
All right.
This coming from a guy that watches 4 hours of somebody unplugging a storm drain in some municipal area in the other part of the country, so
post 10 on YouTube, man. Unclogging drains across Connecticut and Boston. This guy is a hero, man. Jim's like, what the hell are you guys talking
about? I know what you're talking about there, but Brian just sent me the link, so in the other window here, I'm looking through some of these topics.
Okay. While you're looking hoarding through that,
yeah.
I would love to get everybody's perspective on this, because we've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of companies and lots of different people and companies across multiple verticals. So I'm sure we all have slightly different perspectives. But when I saw the summary of today's episode, the one that I attached to was the implementer that has convinced themselves and their organization that they know more than they know and are afraid to admit it. And I thought this was a fluke when I came across it, but I've seen it at least, I don't know, 8 or 9 times. So it's not a fluke. This is definitely happening. And what I mean by this is that you have a certain subset of people in the analytics space that have raised their hand and said, not only do I know how to implement data collection frameworks, I also know how to build out reporting. I'm also a really amazing analyst. You should see me with the wonders I can do with building out optimization programs. But the reality is they don't know those things. And they fed a line to their current employer to get hired, because let's be honest, lots of companies don't know how to hire for these roles. and so they get
or for any role.
For any role for that matter, especially in analytics or any kind of technical role, they kind of get a little starstruck when they hear these keywords and phrases like, oh, this person must know what they're talking about. And what ends up happening is, in order to not be exposed, they stay in a perpetual cycle of implementation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, if you go back and look at these people's resumes, you can see that it aligns with when they go to the next job, because there's only so long a company is going to be patient going through perpetual implementation. At some point in time, someone's going to get upset enough to say, we have to use this data. We have to activate this data. And at that time, this person moves on to their next company and repeats the process.
Like, yes. Ironically, that timeline usually aligns to like a license renewal contract, and the company's like, hey, what's the value we're getting out of this solution that's costing us X million of dollars, or X hundreds of thousands of dollars? And that person's like, all right, well, look, time to go on to the next role where I can rip apart and replace and don't need to show the value. And I've seen that time and time again as well in my career and working with clients.
Yeah, and I think there's also an. Oh, sorry, guys.
Oh, sorry, go. No, I was going to say I'm interested in kind of what if you've seen that, or if you've seen other things that would kind of support that narrative.
There's that one, but then there's one that's related to it, but is still a bit distinct. It's just a level of short-sightedness, and the short-sightedness typically comes from management, where they want to see progress. And with instrumentation, it's easy to show progress, because a lot of times management doesn't necessarily know what instrumenting item A over item B means. Whereas when you get into the details, item A delivers a tremendous amount of value, item B, not so much. So it's easy to say we wired up these two items and they're both equally valuable. So yes, I think it is, related to the person who oversells themselves. But then to that point too, there's just the short-sightedness of, I need to show progress. So instead of either exposing I can't use the data, or maybe even being scared to show what the data tells, I'm just going to keep wiring stuff up to show that there's progress in capturing data.
I mean, yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and I think that also helps support my observations as well, right? That my comfort level is in data collection, and let me throw it out there. I think that's perfectly okay. I think having someone that is a architect is extremely critical. And I think that they need to get over that self-belief that unless I could do all these other things, I'm not valuable. Because I think it's holding them back. It's holding the companies back they're working with. It's more than okay to say my role in this organization is as a MarTech architect. Help me partner with people within the organization that are then going to activate that data, whether they're building dashboards, whether they're running optimization programs, whether they're running email marketing campaigns. I can be their partner. But to try to be the everything when you're not, and try to convince yourself of that fact, keeps companies in this process. And it's interesting in that I've seen two parallel paths in this space. One, kind of what I think you're referencing, Jim, where it's just a continual iteration. We need to collect more stuff. It's not done. We need to collect more. We need to reset things up. But there's also a parallel track in which it's overcomplicate things from the beginning. I don't know if you've ran across
yes, people. I didn't think of that one.
Yes,
but no, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that that actor in this drama that likes to overcomplicate things for overcomplicating them sake. And I think it's overcompensating for lack of comfort in the other areas of activation of the data. And again, I think it's more important for that architect to admit that I don't have to know all those things to still be valuable. And when these architects get in there and overcomplicate things, man, they make a mess of it, and they can really drag out implementations for years. And not only do they end up with something that's not usable, they end up with something that frankly is not maintainable. As soon as they leave, 9 times out of 10, we've seen those things torn down to the ground and rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you guys are you're really focusing on kind of the person that is or the role that is the implementer or the architect that then kind of directs the implementers. But to me, this uh, the underlying problem or the other piece of it is where are these requirements coming from? And I think there's also the marketer or the user or the analyst that gets the paralysis in completing a task by stating, I don't have enough data to get to an answer for our for our stakeholders or whatever it might be. And I've had this recently, but also very much throughout my career, in which I have to coach people through and say, it in the end there will be times in which you really don't have all of the data to do the analysis and have a perfect answer to a business question. And but that doesn't mean you can't show value. You can't There's ways that you can use our tools that we have in this space to be able to come up with some sort of analysis that gives you maybe halfway there or 80% there, and then you can tease out the rest of it with some future implementation.
I'm so glad you brought that up because yeah, I mean, for me, the natural path to go down was the kind of technical path where implementers want to stay in implementation because it's where they feel comfortable. But I think you bring up a great point, and one that we see a lot, especially in the digital analytics space, is that oftentimes this pressure is not coming from the implementer, it's coming from the business owner, it's coming from the analyst. And I can't remember the line you just said. You said sometimes, blah blah blah. I'm like, in the back of my head, I think it's all the times. Your data is never perfect. Your data is never
That's true.
complete.
Yeah. Yeah.
And coming from a background of non-traditional data analytics, so I did, I guess, Martech stuff back in the early 2000s, but I was doing a lot of PLSQL directly against really big databases that had lots and lots of dirty data. And I spent 60 to 70% of my time cleaning and organizing the data just to get it to a point that I could analyze it. And I think one of the negatives of the SaaS environment that we work in with Adobe, with Google Analytics, with all of these other players is they've done such a tremendously good job at doing all that pre-processing and prep of the data that we've not taught the analyst that as an analyst, most of your job is in cleaning and preparing data. And so now what happens in your Adobe data or your Google data, if it's not 99.99% perfect, a lot of analysts throw their hands up, say, I can't analyze this data. I can't work with it. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's unfortunate.
And if the interface is such that, you can do a lot there, but if it doesn't spoon feed something out to you, oftentimes people are unwilling to go to that next step and understand how to actually create or tease that insight out
Yeah.
with imperfect data. And I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up actually around there never being a time that there is a complete data set. Kind of a miscue on my part, because there has not been a single time I have had all data to do analysis, and that is a big part of the job. And I think it's part of the art of being an analyst, part of the art of that science that is being lost. And because again, the sales pitch is our tool is so easy to use, and look at these cool graphs and everything there. But at the end of the day, it's like handing over a blank canvas and some really fancy oil paints to a kindergartner and expecting there to be a Van Gogh style painting out of it at the end. It just,
I mean,
there's steps in between, right?
and even simpler than that, I think I bought a Bob Ross painting kit once, and I'm like, how come I'm not painting an amazing winter scene with a cute
Yeah.
little cabin? But you're right. I mean, that's what we've kind of sold the market is you throw this tag on your site, and then everything else is easy. It's analysis is really really hard. It's hard, and it's okay to admit that. And so, I think people that are listening that their organizations may be stuck in this cycle, I think that's really the place to start, is to question, why are we here? Why are we facing this challenge? And I think one of the difficult things about doing that is a lot of these organizations are one person shops. So that means I have to question myself. I have to be realistic and say, am I the one holding us back? Am I super, super comfortable doing implementation? So, I'm going to get us implemented. And then when we're done, I'm going to want to move to a new tag manager because that's going to give me something else to do. And then move to a new paradigm because that's going to give us something else to do. My part of the problem. But I think that's really where the conversation needs to start is, what is our challenge? Do we have the things staffed correctly? Are we stuck here because people's egos are in play? Are we stuck here because, our analysts have misset expectations that they need perfect data? And then once you recognize that, then I think you can have some really, really valuable conversations about how do we get to a point where we're actually driving value out of these investments.
Yeah, and I'd even go further back than that too, at the purchase decision. When somebody is deciding I need web analytics data, or they've heard I need it, educating yourself on that process of why do you need it, and what is it that you're going to do with that data, or what data do you want to have to be able to do things that you can't do today. And I'm not saying that there isn't a need there. There's clearly a need for the analytics data, but really challenging the business stakeholder, or executive that has the budget that's going to be paying that money, to educate more on what it is that it takes to implement and what it takes to then get the value out of the data. Jim and I recently have kind of been working on a situation in which there's a lot of requests continually being added in, and ultimately we're describing the need there, and putting a business value and a business case out to implement some new pieces. But we're also educating stakeholders on the real actual cost to continually adding data in, be it our time as consultants and as people that are working with them, to the time that their developers spend to deploying that code, to the licensing fees and the increase in data that's being collected and stored, and everything else that's tied. That there's a real cost associated with continually deploying data. And if it doesn't come back to one of those original requests or a business objective that a stakeholder is established, then that should be the clear indicator of whether or not you continue to implement. So one of the things that I'm doing, and Jason, you and I talked a little bit about this morning, with some of the things that I'm trying to improve our customers' experience. One of the things that I'm going to be helping introduce to 33 Sticks into the market is really a better way to define what those business objectives are and tie them back to specific metrics, and going through that exercise and going through that process before you ever even touch code, before you ever even touch a solution, in clearly articulating that this particular business problem has a very specific need and a very specific audience that we're going to segment for. And these are the specific metrics that we're going to use to measure that. I've seen it starting to come up in some marketing organizations, but generally speaking, the market is way behind in doing this type of strategic thinking before they get into the tech, because the tech can just answer all questions. If we get all of the data, we can answer every question, is kind of the thinking out there. And if you put that plan in place first, I think you're going to have a much better approach. And we've been doing this actually with one of our other clients. We onboarded earlier this year. I took that approach, and the implementation went faster, and the reporting went faster, and everybody got approval and buy-in and knew this is the plan that we're going to execute against with, and then ultimately the results then can reflect that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that's a really, really valuable conversation. And I'm wondering, how you position, if we're asked by companies that are struggling with this, what would be our recommendations? So I'm looking at my espresso machine here in the background, and I think it makes a really good talking point for this, in that a lot of companies, when they're buying MarTech solutions, they go out on the market and say, oh, I need this super fancy espresso machine. But they don't even know how to run their Keurig very well. And to me, it's a process of doing and testing and iterating, rather than just going out and buying something because it seems like the right thing to do. So I could have gone out and bought like a $10,000. It'd be really easy to spend $10,000, $15,000 on an espresso machine. I wouldn't know what the hell to do with it. And so for me, it's like, okay, what's a good entry level for someone at my level of experience that's going to allow me to grow and mature, and allow me to learn. And then as I do that, I can learn, okay, what limitations does this have that is going to inform the next thing that I potentially go to? And I think that lots of companies make that mistake where they're completely immature. They don't even know how to pull a basic espresso shot. And then they go out and buy a $15,000 professional espresso machine, when they would be much better off going through an informed path saying, okay, what are our challenges today and what do we want to do? Let's buy something that's going to stretch us, because, with my espresso machine, I'm 6 months in and I'm still learning how to use it. And there's a lot of room for me to grow there. So let's buy something that's going to stretch, but let's be realistic and let's use that as an opportunity to get immediate value and to educate ourselves as we mature, so that when we make the next decision, we're going to have all of that practical knowledge to say, okay, we now know what we want, what we don't want, what our challenges are. But again, I think all too often it's let's go out and buy stuff, and oftentimes we overbuy for the situation simply because we're not experienced enough to know what we're buying for.
Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think about that, Jim?
It would help if I unmuted myself. No, I think, well, yes, people go out and overbuy, and then I've mentioned this a couple times. Like I think MarTech sales completely oversimplify too. So you have both of those situations where you have someone going out and overbuying, and sometimes it's just because a competitor, or not even maybe a competitor, but like a colleague in this industry is using this tool and we want to be like them, so we need to go buy this tool. And then you have MarTech sales that come in and say, oh, it's so simple, and here, let me show you how you can pull this wonderful report. But they didn't say, like, it's a very well staged demo that the person doing it is very experienced with the UI and is able to pull it together. So I think you have both of those situations happening. So then at that point, you then start to run into the situation of, we need all of this information to actually get started.
Yeah, so let's go back to your original question, Jim, where you kind of queued this up. It's like, how do you work in an engagement like this? Now, this could be from a consulting perspective that we're coming from, but it very well could be coming from within an organization, either as I'm a director of analytics, maybe I'm a VP of marketing, and you're in these situations where your MarTech progress has stalled because you're in this implementation paralysis phase. How do we get out of it? How do you approach a situation like that? And again, I think we can take it from both of those perspectives, either as an outside consultant coming in, and I think that makes it a little bit easier, and that we can go in and just say, here's why you guys are screwing things up. And on that perspective, like, who do we talk to? Is it, how high in the organization do we start? How do we present it? And then I think we could take the flip side of it. What if I am an analytics manager? Where do I start? How do I understand where the problem is? Is it me? Is it my team? Is it something else? Let's go back and kind of focus on that question of how we fix the condition.
So I think both cases go back to questioning the why. What is it? Who are you trying to answer a question for, in which that data is needed? And is that data completely needed, or is it needed in a way that requires implementation, or is there enough data that you can provide to get to that answer? And that exists both from a consulting perspective, but also from the a web analytics manager perspective. Is go back to that business requirement. Everything should come back to, what is the business value and the business justification for getting the data or doing the analysis to provide the answer. And if there isn't a tie there, or it's marginal amounts of improvement, then you need to question whether or not there's higher value items that you should prioritize, because there is no lack of ways to tweak existing implementations to make them more accurate or ensure that your most valuable metrics are tracking appropriately and auditing that. I think there's more value in doing that than adding in custom events 250 through 270 to make sure that you have this one-off marketing campaign item taken care of out there. Like, make sure your top 10 metrics are captured properly and that those bugs are squashed out there that exist before you go out there and you try and implement something else.
So let's do a hypothetical. Let's say, Bryant, you are hired by a company as director of analytics. You get in there and you discover that this company has been in endless implementation cycles for the last 3 years. The business really is not happy with the decisions to purchase analytics because they're not seeing value. You discover that several organizations are running their own kind of analytics because they're not getting the data they need from the proper analytics channels. What does your first 90 days look like at addressing that core issue of why have we been stuck in implementation for 3 years, and what can we do to start making some concrete steps to move out of it? And I think you kind of maybe touched on those things, but getting even to more specifics, like what would be your top 3 initiatives over the first 90 days to start to correct that problem?
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll try and remember all of that. I didn't take any notes on that question, but it was a loaded question there. I will. Let's go through it. So first,
I think
first
I found
thing
my
is
next interview question. That's going to be a good interview question.
That's a great interview question. Let's see if I can get the job now. So the first thing that I would do is identify who is responsible for the tool. They're likely the ones that are asking that question as to why aren't we getting any value out of it. Back to one of the earlier points I was making, maybe renewal is up, in the next 6 months, and they need to determine whether or not they're gonna have the financial outlay for this investment moving forward, or if they're just gonna say, you know what, throw my hands in the air. We tried this for 3 years. It's not going to work. Let all of these different departments fend for themselves. So who is that person? I would hope, I'm going to apply this lens to like a Fortune 1000 company, like one of our enterprise type clients out there. And I would hope that person is either, senior director, VP, or CMO level in marketing, or similar levels within technology. Depending on the company, the money is going to come from one of those 2 departments. So I'd go as high up there as I could in determining who made that purchasing decision and what ultimately they're responsible for. Are they responsible for getting the value out of it or getting the implementation in place? Figure out what their needs are, and then find their counterpart, because there's always the 2 parts. There's the technology piece and the marketing piece. So I get their requirements, and that might take me, at a large company, it might take me 3 to 6 weeks just to get on their calendar to have that discussion. So I get that in place as soon as possible to get those requirements. The second is I'm going to start making some assumptions about the company and what needs to be done, and start talking to these rogue groups about why they decided to go rogue. Why is business unit A doing something in Google Analytics when we have an Adobe Analytics instance, and business group B is doing things in Adobe Analytics, but is different than business group C in Adobe Analytics. Like, what was the reasoning that led to that? I'm probably going to uncover that there's some personnel challenges. Maybe that, a developer was refusing to do something a certain way, or, a particular individual was hired in for the role, but totally unqualified and couldn't make heads or tails of all of it. And it just kind of lost control of the project management aspect of it. But really just do as much uncovering as I possibly can. Ultimately, that's going to shape some sort of a vision for me as to why we're in the state we are, that I can then inform those stakeholders back to why we're here. The next step is to then define where are we going, how do we fix it, which, I can continue down this path, but I hope and I can give you more of how I would approach that. But the direct question you asked was helping them understand, why are we here? And that's the approach I'd go through.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I think it's the opposite approach of what we've seen from some people that are in this position. And you brought up this sense of renewal timing. It'd be interesting to have a future podcast episode where we got someone from a vendor to come on and talk about the challenges of this, because I think it is a very real challenge for MarTech vendors, because sales does such an amazing job of queuing up the potential. And I don't think sales is out there blatantly lying to companies about what can be done. They do a really good job of telling that narrative what could be done if they do everything right. Unfortunately, most companies don't end up doing that. And then when it comes time for a renewal, the blame gets put back on the vendor, right? Bryant, you and I have seen this firsthand, where it's like, oh, well, this vendor sucks, like their platform sucks. And we get in there, we're like, no, you suck. This isn't the software, it's you know. But unfortunately, the blame gets put on the vendor, and all too often we see companies, rather than taking a step back and kind of going through that holistic view that you laid out for your 90-day plan, what their plan is, well, we're just going to rip out that vendor and put in a new vendor and it's going to fix the problem. No, you suck. And so vendor B is going to suck too when you roll it out.
Yep. Yeah, and in this goes into another potential topic of discussion for podcast or blog posting or other things, but really what is the proper ratio? Not that there is always a proper percentage of allocation, but really the relationship between technology and people and strategy in order to make something like digital analytics work at a company. And I think all too often people look to spend, or they allocate every dollar they were given from finance to the technology and severely undercut the personnel and the resources that it's going to take to stand up the tool and then get value out of it. I mean, we've got clients that are on Google Analytics that would run circles around clients that are on Adobe Analytics, because they've got the people in place that know exactly how to get exactly what they need out of that tool to do what they need to do to make their business successful. And it happened to us earlier this year, Jason, in which we saw an instance where the concern was how much money was spent on a tool, but they were unwilling or unable to allocate the amount of money to hire and train or get the resources in place to actually use that tool appropriately.
Yeah, no, it's a good call out. And I think part of it is the marketplace needs to be more educated on what, to your point, what that proper mix looks like. And maybe we should be raising our hand to create some content or some information around that, because I think we're in a really ideal place to have seen places where it works and where it hasn't, and start to put out some content that may help organizations properly develop that. I think part of the problem, I think, is on the sales teams for some of these MarTech companies, because they do make it sound super easy, right? Yeah. Like our solution is so well designed that one person can run all of this, and they kind of set the customer up for failure, because it's not true. As great as these products have become over the last 10 to 15 years, it's still, in every company that we work with, it still comes down to people being the factor that determines the overall success of these programs.
Interesting, huh? So I would maybe a recommendation out there for people that are on what we would call in the consulting industry the client side. If you are working for the company that needs to get the value out of it, I would always recommend you get proof of concept before you sign where possible. Have the sales engineers for a tool help actually deploy it in your instance, in your environment, so that you can see in the real world how something might work. I know that that's not always possible for different clients of different sizes. But when I worked at Adobe, those clients that were able to get that, and actually have the sales teams allocate services and people in place, they always were able to get off the ground much quicker and start to get value faster out of the tools, because they're saying, until I see that it's possible to do what you salesperson say it's possible of doing, we're not going to sign. So that's always a recommendation. And if you're on the vendor side, always make sure that you're connecting those dots and providing that that proof of concept as part of your sales pitch. I think all too often, we have shiny decks and we've got really cool animations and we've got sterile environments in which we put our demo data out there to make it work really properly. And I think that's really good to show capabilities. But if you're unable to replicate that in the real world, it's just like being back in school and you're reading out of a book about, how something's supposed to happen in a manufacturing facility, but in the reality, in the day-to-day of that manufacturing facility, if you go and visit one, it's not at all like what's shown in the book. And it's so similar.
I think you're throwing a direct challenge out there to sales engineers to be better. And I completely agree that the canned, let me, walk you through this demo where we overlay something on your site to make it feel like it's yours isn't good enough anymore. Do you remember when Kramer was helping Jerry buy a new Saab?
Yeah.
You remember that episode? And he takes it for a test drive, and the dealership wants him to go on the predefined route where they go out onto the freeway, they exit, they go back to the dealership. And Kramer keeps going. He's like, well, yeah, but I don't drive there. Like, I drive here, and I have to pick up groceries here. That's the reality. And I haven't been in the position to buy lots of cars, but I've noticed the difference in that some dealerships, there's this prescribed 1 mile loop that we're going to go on, and other dealers were like, they'll say, take it for the weekend, because you have to see if it fits in your garage and if it's going to work to go get groceries. And that's a much different, better experience, because that's giving me this is the reality of my day to day. And I may probably getting a little off track, but I think it's such a great call out, and something, especially we're spending so much money on these MarTech tools, that you should say, yeah, but this isn't the route I drive. I don't drive around the block. I drive down here to pick up groceries in Manhattan. So that's where I'm going to take the car.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about, in some cases, the outlay of $5 to $10 million for software with a known ramp up of 3 to 5 years. And, that's a sizable amount of money that I've seen on contracts in which there's an awful lot of trust in some PowerPoint slides and the words of a salesperson out there to be able to make that work. So just, if you're in a position to demand or not, demands maybe too aggressive of a term here, but if you're in a position to require that before you're able to sign, then leverage that. Now, not working for a vendor, I can kind of state that more openly now that I'm independent from any one specific vendor. So,
and you work for a company that values honesty and transparency.
Indeed, I do.
This has been a good conversation. I sent you the Kramer test drive clip. I'll have to link that up in the show notes. That's a good one.
Nice.
That is a good one.
And
ultimately, just for those that haven't seen it, Elaine and Putty's relationship comes into play around the pricing for said Saab as well, which is a great little piece.
Yeah, and I think there's also an Arby's reference in there as well.
Is that it's been ages, but isn't that also the one where he tries to see how far he can get?
Yeah,
when it hits E.
Yeah,
we're dipping below E.
Oh, the needle broke off. Yeah, that's
What's great is Kramer, I think, changed that salesperson forever. He unlocked that salesperson's potential of humanity in that episode. It was beautiful. Like, he became a new person.
Is that the same episode where George tests the Twix cookie bar?
I think it might be, actually. It's the only one with the cookie crunch.
Yeah.
It might be.
Conference room, and he does like a blind taste test. Man, I'm going to have to go back and watch that one. That one is such an awesome episode. Full of goodness.
Yeah.
Full of goodness. Man, it's been a fun conversation.
It has been. And just like my flight home from London, this one flew by. I looked down at one point and I saw we're already we were already 20 minutes in. So no, this was
I'm gonna see if the company will buy me a Hello Kitty drum set, and I'm gonna put it on my desk so that I can do the every time Jim comes up with ever since Jim became a dad, his
Oh yeah.
the dad jokes, the walking around in the sand
Yep.
with the white socks and the jorts. He's
You know,
got full dad.
It's funny because Jason, you've got the oldest kids. I've got kind of the middle. My kids are 10, 9, and 5, and then Jim just joined us, but he's like surpassed us so quickly with the dad jokes. It's amazing.
It's incredible. It's really been it's been an honor to watch this play out. It really has.
That's really funny. It's the lack of sleep that I'm now, I am now experiencing.
And I'm going to hold Jim to his promise, because he said that he was going to do yard work with the full dad outfit on, and he was going to take. I'm still waiting for that to happen.
Yep.
Okay, I will. I'll take a picture of it.
And for our listeners that started listening and then fell asleep and are waking back up and are like, "What the hell happened to this episode?" Off the tracks here.
But that's why we title it the way we do.
And this is what makes it so enjoyable.
Exactly. We could be super dry, or we could be talking about Seinfeld and dad jokes and socks with sandals.
Yep.
This seems better. Cool.
Now, this was a lot of fun, so I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up for now, and I'll catch you both later.
All right.
We'll see you.
See ya. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of 33 Tangents. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast aggregator so others can find us. If you would like to reach us, you can do so by emailing podcast@33sticks.com or on the web at 33tangents.33sticks.com. 33 Tangents is a production of 33 Sticks, an analytics boutique.